All right, so welcome again. My name is Lee Kligman. This is the first session of 2022 for From the Ground Up, a webinar mastermind series where we interview some of Toronto's leading developers and their interesting projects. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Christian Huggett, Vice President of Development from Podium Developments. My name is Lee Kligman. I'm with the Yorkville team, a residential and commercial sales team in Toronto, specializing in the Yorkville area. My partner and very good friend, Nama Blonder, is unfortunately not available to join us today, so I'll be taking over. So welcome, Christian. Appreciate you joining us today. Before we get going, I'm going to read a little introduction about you. So Christian Huggett is the VP of Development of Podium Developments. He steers a company through site acquisition to project stabilization, development and design trends, site and building layout, municipal approvals, and sales and marketing. Quite a big role. Prior to joining Podium, Christian was a planning, urban design, and architecture consultant for several Toronto-based firms. He has a master's degree in urban design from the University of Toronto and an honors bachelor degree in environmental studies with an economics minor from the University of Waterloo. So Christian, thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be speaking specifically about one of your projects at 80 Dale Avenue in Scarborough. So why don't you start by taking us through the acquisition process? I know it's been a couple of years since you acquired the site and it's gone through some different design iterations. So why don't you take us through it?
Great, thanks, Lirad, and welcome everyone. Happy to be here and happy to share our journey on this site so far. So as you mentioned, I worked for Podium, and Podium traditionally and originally was more focused on student housing. We got our start in student housing. We're focused more on institutional locations. But this site was one of many now that we are focused on, which is really about a pivot to multifamily res. And we saw this site as an opportunity for that to expand and basically pivot ourselves a little bit into more of that space. So I'm going to share my screen as sort of a starting point here. So hopefully you can see that. This is sort of a slide we put together when we were looking at the site. So those who are looking it up online, make sure you type Scarborough and not Toronto. We're not the site in the middle of Rosedale. We are a site out in Scarborough, and that's amalgamation for you. But we are literally across the street from the Guildwood GO train station and Via station. So this map shows Kingston Road, which is running through. There is a railway line in behind that connects to downtown and then goes out east towards Montreal. And you'll notice along Kingston Road there is a number of taller buildings. So it really is sort of a mix of different kinds of uses in a corridor of significant towers. And a lot of those were built, starting in the late 60s, 70s, but there are certainly newer projects that have gone in. So how this project came to us is there was a bid put out by Build Toronto, which is now Creatio. And this was a remnant piece of land I understand was originally held as part of the Scarborough Expressway. So back in I think in the 50s or 60s, there was an idea of bringing the Don Valley, up through Lakeshore and connecting out east and along the rail corridor. So there was a swath of land that would then connect into Kingston, which was, one of the original highways is the road to Kingston Road, and it would connect by through the back of this site. This site is a 4.5 acre parcel with about 240 feet of depth, backing onto railway, sort of adjacent to Kingston Road as it creates a flyover over the railway, and adjacent to a single family neighborhood park and a tower at 90 Dale. So 90 Dale is a condo built, I think, early 90s, late 80s, 17 stories. Just moving along with that site. So if you can see that, the blue is essentially what was called 80 Dale. And when Build Toronto was selling the site, they went through a bidding process. So we bid along with a number of other people to buy the site. And the site had an unusual shape. So there was a small nub that connected out to Dale Avenue, which does this. And then there's an existing park and another, the beginning of the single family houses here. The actual strange configuration was partly resolved through Build Toronto. They needed frontage. This land was essentially landlocked without access onto Dale originally. So as part of their work, they coordinated a previous swap with the park to allow for an access out. The reason mainly was Kingston Road, as I mentioned, is going a flyover a bridge over the railway. And so although we have considerable frontage on Kingston Road, the grade here is quite significant difference. And it meant that there was no direct access onto Kingston Road. Keep that in mind, because that's actually a very important point for the development of this site. So although we had access on Kingston Road, the actual ability to connect to it was virtually impossible. And as a result, the site was zoned highway commercial. Those who know highway commercial zoning uses is usually auto-oriented. So getting a service station or car wash or any of those things that were permitted as of right were not really possible because you could not get access from Kingston Road to the site. And essentially it was landlocked. So they had sold a property with a small wedge attached to Dale. As part of our work, we actually looked at the site and realized that it created an unusual scenario and worked to try and normalize the site. How we did that was, first of all, I jumped ahead, but we were the successful bidders. We went through a long interviewing process with Build Toronto and ultimately put in a bid that was approved. And so we took over the land. We started that process in summer 2017. I think we closed December 14th, 2017. As part of that, we were looking at the site and realized that the site, as I mentioned, wasn't rectilinear generally, but also was that switchback made it quite awkward. So what we decided to do, and had several meetings with the City of Toronto, is to purchase the adjacent single-family home on the edge at 66 Dale. And what that allowed us to do is sorry, I'll make this a little more clear, is transfer that land, which was in red in the top, as a swap to parkland, and normalize the shape of what would be formalized as parkland. A lot of it was already protected for under an OP, and allow us to get that blue sliver back from parkland, which was not really desirable for the creation of park. And so it allowed us to create a more normal development with a property line that was straight off of Dale. So that's sort of the acquisition of the site. And when we bought the site, Build Toronto had put forward a proposal, which I'm just going to make sure I share here. Apologies. Sorry. It's an image, not a PDF, and I'm showing my PDF. Now I can't find my Zoom. There we go, stop share. Sorry, here, I've got it now. I swear I've done this before. Okay, so hopefully you can see that image, Lirad, the image.
Yep, we can, that's perfect.
Okay, great. So Build Toronto had put forward a proposal for 95, I believe, stacked towns back to back. So you can see the site, we're now oriented, turned almost 360 degrees. This is Kingston Road. This is 90 Dale, the 17-story. This is Dale. And there was a switchback road that came off and ended in a cul-de-sac. So we bought the site thinking this is what we were going to do. Closed, as I mentioned, middle December. Unfortunately, in early January, there was an announcement that Toronto development charges were going to increase by more than 100% within the next year and a half. And because that was within our timeline of getting approvals and marching towards development, we realized that this significantly altered the viability of the project within a month of closing. And we were very concerned at that time about the ability to sell units in this market, as well as pay for them economically because of the DCs. So that resulted in us, we were already well on our way. We already had plans ready to submit, essentially. And it created our first pivot. So what we ended up doing was saying, okay, we've looked at this site. We think it has an overarching avenues designation on the portion that is adjacent to Kingston Road. It's in a corridor of towers. It's within 500 meters of a what's now known as an MTSA, of GO train. And there was already an existing informal connection through the site. Neighborhood would walk through our site and go under the bridge and connect to the GO train. So we took that as a sign that was a good thing to do, to think about connecting that more formally, and that there was potential here, because if we looked at the site and said, okay, we're transitioning and we're so far away from what is more of a stable neighborhood, is it possible to intensify the site, make some moves related to the development charge news, and try to make a site still economically viable? So as a result, can you see this new image there?
No, it's still the same one.
Okay, I've just got to share it individually every time. So this is what we pivoted to, and this is actually, I think, where we first met with Nama. She connected with us when she saw this going to community council. So now you're looking at a rendering from the corner of Dale. So if you can orient yourself, the corner of Dale, the park would be on the left, and on the right would be 90 Dale, just off the screen, the 17-story. So the thought was that we could keep, through normalizing that property line, which I already explained in the swap, that there could be the potential for a new tower building closest to the transit station, tucked in beside the bridge and the railway. And so this is definitely more units. We had, originally we were thinking around 100 units. This is about 300 and I think it was 386 units, with a majority of them in a tower form, and then still had the at-grade townhouses in the foreground, sort of a transition here. So that was our next formal submission, which was made in May of 2018. And at that time, we had also made a submission to the city regarding the open door process, and had put forward some options for affordable housing on the site. So part of this site included about 1/3 of affordable housing. So this is sort of our pivot to that, and we went and started the process with the city. Unfortunately, there was a number of factors that came into play with this, pivot, and I think it's kind of a good time to cover, if I'm doing okay for time, Irad, sort of the opportunities and constraints that I understood, our team understood as part of that. So the opportunities we saw were that there was a large site. It's 4.5 acres. It's within 500 meters. I mentioned it's partly avenues. It's within a corridor of towers. There's only one neighbor directly, that's 90 Dale condos, right? So we had that, it was possible to directly connect to the train station. There was space to transition. There was minimal and direct, what we hope were minimal and direct adverse impacts. And it brought a scale that we thought would bring some community benefits and improve the area. And so we were talking about affordability, we were talking about a bunch of other things as well. Unfortunately, at that point, because this was a significant departure from the existing OP, the OP was neighborhoods, although there was an avenue overlay. And because we had to drive connection through Dale Avenue and not through Kingston Road, I think that was fundamentally one of the biggest challenges to this site, notwithstanding that it was a fairly stable neighborhood and they were very concerned about the additional amount of density, although they were concerned about any amounts, to be honest, even with the towns. So we went into a process with planning and with the politicians of the area. We also got had an interesting thing where the election boundaries were revisited after submission. You may recall, as those were revisited, that our local councillor actually was changed. And so we were first speaking with Gary Crawford, who was concerned about this for his residents. And then it changed to Paul Ainsley, the boundary change. And so we kind of fell into this strange time where politically it was changing. There was an abeyance on our project once this was submitted because of the election. So they actually asked for it to be obeyed while election was sorted and to get more feedback from the neighborhood. And so we ended up getting, taking about a year through public consultation, abeyance, and review to then ultimately land on our final plan, which I'm going to share now. So hopefully you can see that now. So this is the plan, a rendering of the plan, essentially that's been approved, give or take. So there's been a bit of tweaks and stuff like that as it went through for final approval. But we heard quite clearly that there wasn't a lot of political support, and planning was very concerned with the scale of the tower and sort of the impacts. So we felt comfortable with it, but unfortunately we decided that it would be best interest for us to pivot again. So this is ultimately the end result, which is a 7-story building that is stepping down to the park, as you can see by the terracing, and a 12-story building up near Kingston and towards the GO train. And so this building, now I can share, I'll share sort of a quick rendering, and then I'm happy to chat about whatever you like, but I just wanted to kind of explain the pivot. So hopefully you can see that view. That's sort of a 3D view rendered of the building, which has a POP. So that's those squiggly and planted areas at the back are now to be dedicated as a publicly accessible open space that connects to a termination that will allow for future connection under the bridge. When we actually paid for a survey and a study of how technically that could be done, although it's not on our lands. So there's future potential to connect through, and ultimately we've got about 286 units in 2 buildings with shared amenity, a combined public parking underground. Sorry, not public, a private underground project with a loop driveway drop off that addresses both buildings. So ultimately, we think we have a really great project. Ultimately, we think it's very exciting, a great location, and it will front on a park, overlook a golf course, be right near transit, in a great area. So that's kind of the pivots. Unfortunately, we were approved at council. So fortunately, we were approved at full council, but we're unfortunately just appealed. So I mentioned it's been a 4-year process, and we are still now heading into an appeal. We're hoping to be able to resolve that quite quickly because of the amount of effort and consultation that's gone into it. But that's still to be determined. But ultimately, we think it's a great project, and we're very excited about the potential here.
Well, thanks for sharing, Christian. It definitely, it's really interesting to see how the project has pivoted over time, and it looks like the end result is really quite exciting. Question we wanted to ask is, with the recent proliferation of GO transit connected developments in and around the Scarborough area, a lot of them are quite a bit more aggressive in terms of density. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how those sites compare to these ones, to this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of reinforced policy about why that should be happening. And I think if we had access off Kingston Road, if that was possible, this would have been an easier discussion to have. The fact that we were forced to drive access through, you can see the access out to Dale and to Kingston Road. We've implemented and suggested some traffic improvement measures and a number of things. We're building a extension of the sidewalk out to Kingston, some other things to help with that. But I think that was fundamentally the challenge with this site, is something designated neighborhood, and that people sort of looked at it because it was a blank slate. People have been using it as an extension of the park. So you can see the park. It's not improved on the right of the image, but that was basically kind of like what our site looks like. So people walk their dogs there, people cut through there, people go there to do whatever. And so they kind of looked at it as park, even though it was never designated as park or thought of as that. And so there's a lot of hurdles to kind of overcome here that made it challenging. And I think, if the GO train was on this side of Kingston versus the other, that also would have really helped the conversation. There's some applications just off the screen, the former car dealership right beside the station, that are quite aggressive, and certainly those are, that's what I'm seeing across the GTA in terms of GO train proximity. So I'm not surprised, and to me it makes sense. I just think, like, in terms of balancing all of those items, that was something we had to really carefully navigate, as you can see.
Yeah, it's interesting that something as important as density can be affected by, access to a particular road or avenue. So it's really an interesting factor. What would you say are some of the key learnings that you had over the 4-year process of taking the site through the approvals process that you can apply to other projects, or as helpful tips to other developers undergoing the process?
I mean, we have a number of other sites in Toronto, and talking to my colleagues and keeping my pulse on what's happening in the city. It's not just our site that's been slow, relative to approval. It seems like that's a real challenge. I mean, we also, to add to the challenges, we had 3 separate city planners over the course of this file and 2 managers. And so every time there was knowledge lost between the transfer, there was, starting over with, deep and long discussions on those parts. So it was tricky. It was really tricky. And I'm seeing a lot of that, there's a lot of pressure and sort of understaffed, I feel, particularly in Scarborough, for a planning department. And so they're really having a hard time managing their workload and transferring information. So I think that in spite of all that, we've got a good project. I think ultimately we're, like I said, we're very excited. I think the neighborhood can feel really great about what it'll be like. And I think it'll be, I think it's very sensitive to their interface. We also, as part of Section 37, will contribute to the park, the park improvements itself. So there, beyond just the POPs, there is park improvements that will take place that everyone will look and feel and be able to live with. So I think it's a real tough balance. This is not a new thing. There's been pressure. There's only so many intensification sites, and they abut against other competing factors that we have policy in place that treats them in a certain way as well. So I think that I think is the biggest challenge, and timing. And so I would just encourage everyone to give yourself lots of time, and even though things might make sense in a lot of ways in terms of aggressive intensification, there's a lot of competing pressures to achieving those, even though it seems, and it maybe to us on these calls, it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of other people who aren't engaged in that day to day. And so they just are concerned about what that means for them.
For sure. Well, it's very exciting that you're near the home stretch, and you've created a product that's really quite interesting. So I'm sure it's going to be great. And then just on that point, what are your plans to go to market? It's a great site. It's surrounded by parkland along two sides, which is really interesting. What's happening next?
Yeah, so we, unfortunately, given the appeal, we're sort of trying to sort that out. We are in talks with partners, potential partners, as we speak. So there are multiple ways. We've been thinking more on the side of a rental project here, but we have certainly protected for rental or condo. And we are thinking of a sort of 55 plus community here. We think the proximity to the golf course, proximity to amenities, Guildwood, sort of more space and great access to parks. And, Morningside Park's one of the biggest parks in the city, is 5 minutes away. Morningside Mall redevelopment. There's a whole bunch of different things, as well as the GO train. You can get into the city in 23 minutes. You can get on the VIA. And so it's pretty attractive for a number of reasons. So I think, we're very optimistic about the potential for different users, but I think we're kind of thinking about 55 plus and currently zoning in on a rental.
So when you say 55 plus, are you considering to maybe bring in an assisted living operator, or would this be more of just a lifestyle type of marketed community?
Yeah, I think it'll be more lifestyle, although certainly we might gear some of the amenities to that community lifestyle. But I think at this point, it's more of a lifestyle play. Okay,
great. Well, that brings us to the end of today's session. So Christian, thank you once again for sharing all your insights. Really interesting project, and cool to see how it's evolved and pivoted along the way. I think it shows us that sometimes you go in thinking one thing, and then it becomes something completely different. But I think for all stakeholders involved, this is an amazing plan. So thank you again for joining us, Christian.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for everyone who joined us today. We'll be in touch with more exciting episodes of From the Ground Up. Thanks again, and take care, guys.